Everyone in the castles looked at that battlefield, where fights were being fought both on the ground and in the air. Everyone in the castles looked at that battlefield, where fights were being fought both on the ground and in the air. Other than dead fighters, others who have lost the ability to fight due to severe injuries went to hide on the side, not daring to continue. As those fighters lost the ability to fight, the others would not have deliberately fight them, unless someone had a grudge or a score to settle. At present, there were only tens of mighty ones who were still capable of continuing to fight. The strongest few were still around, such as the highly anticipated Pang Xiao, Yen Tong, and Zhuo Su. Many placed massive bets on the three of them. Those who had bet on them all seemed rather anxious, seeing all three of them still around, getting increasingly close to the goal. When there were 10 on the battlefield left standing, they were then allowed to try to rise from the platform. So long as the Crimson Dragon above approved of them, it would let them pass. All three of them had very good chances of earning such approval. Other than the three of them, the most eye-catching ones were Yu Sheng and the others around him, especially Yi Wuchen, Huang Jioge, Su Ke and Amp, Qin Zhuang. After he had single-handedly wrecked the whole team of mighty ones from Tianyin City, few went to fight them. Some tried to challenge Yu Sheng, and all of them ended up being practically run over without mercy. While Yu Sheng would have refrained from killing anyone, as he did not bear any grudge against them, having some bones broken and eliminated from the battle was inevitable. The other 4 from Qinya City who came with Yu Sheng were all still on the battlefield, and that earned the ire of many. While everyone acknowledged Yu Sheng's strength among the 5, Su Ke was weaker than the rest, while there was a considerable gap between Qin Zhuang, Huang Jioge, and those top-notch powers. Among the ones who had fallen in battle, some were stronger than the few of them, yet all 5 led by Yu Sheng remained standing. There was no other reason why they were still around other than that Yu Sheng was there to hold down the fort. If any one of the other 4 were in danger, he would have saved them. Anyone who proved powerful enough would have had to take all 5 of them down at once. One fighter after another took to the sky, and the fighters gradually stopped fighting one another. It was as if they had come to some consensus. Pang Xiao took a look at Yu Sheng's party, and then at Yen Tong, Zhuo Su, and the others, saying, "How about we take them out first before continuing our fight?" "Good idea." Yen Tong nodded at Pang Xiao. He did not object to the suggestion. "Will do." Black flames gleamed and flickered in Zhuo Su's eyes, emanating an extremely dangerous aura. Yu Sheng frowned. A terrifying aura was sensed everywhere around him. It was not just Pang Xiao and the other 2. Even all others who were left standing seemed to have agreed on the idea of removing Yu Sheng's party first. Yen Tong stepped forward like a fiery god of war, every step causing the rising dragon platform to shake as he charged at Yu Sheng. Fiery heat waves swept all over the place, turning into a firestorm out to drown Yu Sheng. Pang Xiao and the others made a move as well, charging with Yen Tong and emanating terrifying aura. Zhuo Su turned into a bolt of lightning, heading straight for Yi Wuchen. If Pang Xiao and Yen Tong intended to move against Yu Sheng, who was the strongest of the 5, he saw no reason not to let them be. It would have been best if both sides ended up injured and eliminated from the fight, while he went on to take out the others first. Boom! Yu Sheng stepped out in midair, causing the rising dragon platform to shudder. His raging form charged straight at Yen Tong's overbearing form of a fiery god of war without fear. Both sides came near each other, and Yen Tong threw his arm forward. The punch thrown by the fiery god of war seemed like a red-hot fiery hammer. It was harsh and overbearing, and lava-like fires were seen coursing about it. Yu Sheng's arms streaked through the air, and his body seemed to be expanding as well, which seemed to be his battle form manifesting. The dark golden Buddhist and demonic punch burst into a myriad of illusions before coalescing into a single punch again. Rumbles were heard everywhere as terrifying fiery waves swept all over the place, but none of them retreated. Pang Xiao's attack seemed to be about to connect at that moment. A flaming halberd appeared in his hand, streaking through the air like a halberd of heavenly gods as it was launched at its target. However, the target was not Yu Sheng, but Yen Tong. The eyes of many froze as their hearts raced. They all seemed to have stopped breathing. There was indeed no trust in the battle of the sleeping dragon, and alliances were forged for the sake of convenience only. Pang Xiao was not only out to fight, he was aiming to win as well. At the moment he lashed out, one figure after another zipped past and attacked at the same time. Several fighters were attacking Pang Xiao at once. That caused the spectators' eyes to freeze again after they snapped out of their dazed state. Surprises kept coming. Yen Tong and Yu Xing distanced themselves. Yen Tong's entire body of lava fires solidified and was out to devour everything. When Pang Xiao's fiery halberd was about to reach its target, deafening high-pitched noises were heard. It still managed to tear through the solidified lava and sink bit by bit into the body of the fiery god of war. The charged hit was exceptionally powerful, giving no chance to Yen Tong at all. As the fiery halberd tore through its target, the raging body of the fiery god of war crumbled. However, a figure shot out from it, basking in flames. He lashed out both arms at Pang Xiao at the same time, sending fires of lava at his opponent. Pang Xiao's expression changed. He thrust away with his halberd, tearing through the lava fires, but at the same time, attacks from several top-notch mighty ones were there as well, blasting straight at him. Hunt for the dragon. That term flashed in the heads of countless people in the castles. That was the hunt for the dragon plan in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon. The hunt for the dragon referred to a group of people teaming up in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon, but would not have exposed themselves in earlier stages. They would not have stood out until key battles at later stages. It was only then the target realized that those who had been fighting their respective battles had been of the same gang. However, it was difficult for the hunt for the dragon plan to be implemented, as few would have been able to make sure that they stayed until the late stages. There were more who chose to team up right from the start, but there were many who did so drawing the attention of others and were quickly wiped out. Many laid out hunt for the dragon plans and never got to execute them, as there was no way of doing so. However, no one would have expected that the one to do so to be Yen Tong, the young city lord of Flaming Prison City, who was of great renown and highly anticipated right from the start. He was hell-bent on getting through the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon. Yen Tong needed to win the battle, as his clan had placed heavy bets on him. Furthermore, as a native resident of Crimson Dragon Realm, he needed an opportunity. While Pang Xiao was someone from the City Lord's office of Crimson Cloud City and a descendant of a Ren Huang, but his main forces lied in other realms. As such, he was not as familiar with Crimson Dragon Realm as those from Flaming Prison City. Many spectators found that those who participated in Yen Tong's hunt for the dragon plan were top-notch figures from many other cities in the Crimson Dragon Realm, instead of originating from Flaming Prison City. It was, however, apparent that they were all fighting Yen Tong. One could have easily deduced just what kind of a hefty price did Flaming Prison City paid to participate in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon. The eyes of many spectators turned in the direction of the mighty ones from Flaming Prison City. If those people had paid such a hefty price to get the hunt for the dragon plan's execution, then Flaming Prison City would have definitely placed heavy bets on that battle. Many who had bet on Pang Xiao looked extraordinarily gloomy. Rumbles were continuously heard from the battlefield at that moment, as Pang Xiao was being ganged up on. However, dazzling light from his golden armor on his body held strong. Yang Tong turned into a fiery god of war yet again, throwing his punches at Pang Xiao, whose defenses eventually gave altogether. He spat blood from his mouth and was pinned to the ground from the air. Terrifying, devastating powers raged in his body, and he became severely injured. However, Yen Tong did not kill him, for he was still a descendant of a Ren Huang, and Yen Tong saw it fit to show mercy. The atmosphere in the castles felt rather glum. Pang Xiao sneaked up on Yen Tong, and yet he was the one who ended up pummeled. Of the three most highly anticipated candidates, one was officially out of the game. Many who had bet on him suffered losses. However, that was how the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon was. At that moment, there were also the ones who cheered and howled excitedly in the castles, the ones who had placed their bets on Yen Tong. The game was set by then. Zhuo Su, who was fighting Yi Wuchen, retreated and distanced himself from his opponent, a tight frown on his face. Xin Jun, who was on the top of a castle, frowned and felt something was off. If Yen Tong went to such lengths to execute the hunt, then there is no way he will go home empty-handed. He would have begun sweeping everyone out from then on out then. Only by doing so would he be able to show his powers and then rise. City Yen mumbled in a low voice as if saying to Yi Futian deliberately. That was what Shinjun was thinking as well. Things had just gotten tricky. Yen Tong turned his eyes and looked at Zhuosu, saying, "Does anyone in their midst belong to you?" Other than his men and the 5 led by Yusheng, there was also a group that teamed up right away. Furthermore, he sensed that he had been locked onto by hostile auras, alerting him. The mantis stalking the cicada was unaware of the aureole behind it. Clever. Zhuosu smirked and one figure after another zipped past, gathering at Zhuosu's side. Many spectators were shocked at that scene. 2 top-notch figures were executing the hunt for the dragon plan, and both parties managed to stay to the very last stages. There was still a group of people on the battlefield who did not belong to any side, and they all looked glum at that moment. How about we take them out before we have our final showdown? Yen Tong said. Sure. Zhuosu nodded. Mighty ones from both sides acted at the same time, but they did not team up. All fighters who were of one side or another went out to fight those without a side of their own, defeating and overwhelming all of them. That went on until those from both parties, as well as the 5 led by Yusheng, were left standing. It seemed that the final showdown would have broken out between Yen Tong and Zhuosu, or maybe both of them would have gained recognition as well. Shinjun was despaired, seeing how things on the battlefield turned out. That was indeed the battle of the sleeping dragon. He schemed against Yi Futian, yet the battle of the sleeping dragon was nonetheless filled with unpredictable elements. Yi Futian, too, lowered his head and looked below, finding people from both sides charging at the 5 led by Yusheng. The 5 no longer split at that moment, standing in a wedge-shaped formation, with Yusheng at the forefront, Yi Wuchen and Huang Jioga at the flanks, and finally, Qin Zhuang and Su Kei taking the rear, looking at the mighty ones from both sides coming. The ones on the castles took one look at those people around Yen Tong, who was, at the moment, walking towards Yusheng. There were several of them who were top-notch figures from the city lord's offices. What more could one do with a situation like this? It seemed like the 5 from Qinya City were about to go down hard. They were only wondering if Yen Tong and Zhuosu would have been kind enough to spare the 5 of them after defeating them. However, many looked forward to such an ending to the battle. After the 5 from Qinya City got eliminated, Yen Tong of Flaming Prison City and Zhuosu of the Black Flame Clan would have fought for the right to rise, and there would have been a great battle. However, many looked forward to such an ending to the battle. After the 5 from Qinya City got eliminated, Yen Tong of Flaming Prison City and Zhuosu of the Black Flame Clan would have fought for the right to rise, and there would have been a great battle. The winner would have been able to rise from the Rising Dragon platform. About 1/3 of the spectators lost their money after Pang Xiao was eliminated, but there were still over half of them who had bet on Yen Tong and Zhuosu. A great many would have been able to get rich regardless of whichever side ended up winning. As such, both sides looked forward to the upcoming battle very much. At present, they needed first to eliminate the 5 from Qinya City. Do it, Yen Tong said and stepped out right away. His huge flaming body was filled with overbearing might. Terrifying flames shot from his eyes. The place where Yusheng and the other 4 were in became shrouded by intense will of the great path of flames. It felt as if that place had just turned into a purgatory. At the same time, those by Yen Tong's side charged at Yusheng's group from the flanks at blitzing speed, bursting with terrifying pressure. The incoming assailants saw that Yusheng was not bothering to evade and stepped out right away, charging at the ones coming at them. Yen Tong grabbed at the space before him, and the purgatorial fires in that space turned into that spouting from lava, which were then gradually solidified, trapping Yusheng. Conventional pinnacle sages would have easily been burnt to a crisp with such a move. Close. Someone above extended their hand, and golden diagrams appeared one after another, closing in on Yusheng, trying to trap him inside the purgatory. Yet another person who was versed in the will of the great path of space froze the space Yusheng was in. In that instant, the step that Yusheng had taken seemed to have stopped altogether, with him being completely trapped. The others around lashed out at the same time. One of them held a golden spear and thrust into the air, aiming straight for Yusheng's body. Another threw a punch of the great path, tearing through space as it headed straight for Yusheng. The crowd heard nothing but continuous rumbles as if that space was frozen altogether. Everyone threw whatever they had at Yusheng, intending to crush him with their attacks. Zhuosu chose to continue to attack Yi Wuchen. Boundless, eerie black flames gushed around him, emanating terrifying, burning might. It was as if auras of death had blocked out the sky and shrouded the area as he headed straight for Yi Wuchen. Yi Wuchen stepped out, and dazzling light was seen emanating from his brow. Boundless sword will surrounded him, and thousands of sword aura manifested above, with every sliver containing the power of the path of shredding. His will of great path was infused within every single sword will, and rules flowed as if they had grown eyes of their own and attacked the black flames blocking out the sky, tearing them apart gradually. However, the black flames were extraordinarily overbearing and were capable of burning off the sword will, which ended in continuous mutual destruction. Several moved in from the flanks. Qin Zhuang invoked his sword with a small sword diagram appearing behind him. The sword will from Su Ke flowed into him in a frenzy. He lent his sword to Qin Zhuang, as he had not been training in the way of the sword as long as Qin Zhuang did. Qin Zhuang had been able to touch the great path as well, and he was well on his way to becoming a saint. Qin Zhuang waved his hand when an assailant attacked. The small sword diagram zipped out and streaked through space. At the same time, Huang Jiuge's Renhuang Bao life spirit appeared, bursting with extremely brilliant light. It contained some powers of the imperial path. While he was still lacking in his development and had yet to be able to develop will of the great path, the burst of might through his lineage of Renhuang was not that much weaker compared to Qin Zhuang, who had developed such powers of great path. 9 arrows were shot one after another, tearing through space like rainbows, holding off the assailants. The few of them were more on the defensive. At that moment, terrifying destructive aura burst, and Zhuosu was seen standing with a black shadow behind his back, which was tall and mighty, as well as shrouded in black flames. Zhuosu was a descendant of the Black Flame Emperor. If he were to reach Renhuang plane level, he would have been able to pass on the powers of the Great Path to his descendants, infused within their life spirits. As such, those who were born from genius parents had it easier in developing comprehension of the Great Path. Yi Futian, for instance, had it far easier in his processes of developing such comprehensions. Furthermore, he was able to develop a myriad of wills of the Great Path and interconnecting them. Zhuosu extended his hand forward and grabbed at Yi Wuchen. His pitch-black hand blocked out the sky like some devastating black hole, which was forged from boundless black flame auras. When Yi Wuchen's sword wills touched the black hand, they were burnt down right there and then. Yi Wuchen wore a solemn expression as a sword shot from his brow, ringing as it emerged containing the will of the Great Path. Sword wills in their surroundings flowed in a frenzy right there and then. Thousands of sharp swords condensed, with tens of thousands compressed into thousands, then hundreds, and the number continued to shrink. Yi Wuchen's body was shrouded with the light of the sword. The path of the swords merged into a single entity and fused with the sword before him. However, that devastating sword will was still found everywhere. "Go," Yi Wuchen uttered. The sword shot forth and came to his enemy within an instant. The sword and the black hand clashed, which ended up with the black hole-like hand exploding and crumbling right away. However, the terrifying might infused within the sword was weakened as well, returning before Yi Wuchen. The act of the sword master of Lihan lending his sword to Yi Wuchen told the younger swordsman that the way of the sword was more than just expansion, it was one of contraction as well. One sword could have multiplied into 2, then 3, then up to 10,000. That was the way of the sword. Having 10,000 swords compressed into one was, too, a way of the sword. In yet another battlefield, many mighty ones were bombarding Yusheng at the same time, intending to destroy his body, which was trapped inside their attacks. However, none of them were able to see that the dark golden shimmer glowing on that body was turning increasingly bright. That terrifying lava fire of hell remained incapable of melting down his body. The intense offensive powers from all those around him were, too, unable to break his body. A physical body of such strength? Countless spectators on the castles who watched the battle shuddered. The attacks from Yen Tong and the others were absolutely near that of Saint levels, after all. They were all baffled to find that they were unable to destroy his body. Just what kind of a physical body is this? They wondered. Yi Futian's expression was a calm one. When the medicine saint went to the Holy Ji Palace at the lower worlds back then, many had taken medicine baths, and Yusheng went through with the whole course. Furthermore, Yusheng was a warrior whose innate forte was his very own body, which was even stronger than Yi Futian's. Yusheng, whose body had been innately infused with the power of the Great Path, had grown to be infinitely near that of a saint at the moment. The solidified lava fires, dazzling golden diagrams, and other powers keeping him trapped, all crumbled. Yusheng burst with dark golden light, and slivers of terrifying light of the demons swept through the entire place. Terrifying demonic storms blown on the ones surrounded him, enabling them to have a taste of unparalleled might. Yusheng's body hovered in the air. Dark demonic might coursed in a frenzy around him, shrouding the entire area and spreading out to the rising dragon platform. Many looked at their sides and found dark demonic might brushing through them, making them feel chills all over their bodies. Yusheng's pitch-black eyes shimmered with demonic light. They were extremely overbearing. It was as if anyone who so much as looking at them would have been cast into boundless darkness, compelled to bow before him. The terrifying demonic aura gushed at his body in a frenzy, making that body of his look increasingly huge. It was as if he was constructing his battle form right there and then. A devil battle form appeared before long, standing tall in the air. Kill! One of the assailants waved their hand, and a golden spear was launched at him, banging hard on the body of the demonic battle form and crumbling right away. Yusheng extended his hand, coalescing flowing dark aura at the center of his palm, and a pitch-black devil axe materialized. He stepped into the air and shook the entire place. Everyone was able to sense that overbearing might of the great path emanating from him, coming down with his steps. Yusheng stepped forward and appeared right before one of them, swinging his axe down as if to cleave the heavens apart. That person was terrified, throwing their hands with great force, bringing boundless golden diagrams to place the space before them in lockdown. However, at the very moment when the axe came down, cracking noises were heard as the golden diagrams were cleaved apart right there and then. The one who had made a move against Yusheng before everyone else was cut down right away, their blood splattered all over the place. The roaring, noisy castles quieted down once again as if that axe had cleaved onto their hearts. What kind of power is this? They asked themselves. Powerful will of the great path of space came down on Yusheng at that moment. He turned around and looked at someone. He then seemed to have crushed that will of the great path with only a single step. There was a magnitude difference to powers of the great path, after all. He took yet another step and his opponent's body seemed to have been locked right away, practically pinned down. Yusheng lifted his arm and brought the axe down again. His opponent roared and shook off that overbearing power and retreated. A flash of the axe was seen brought down. Cracking, high-pitched noises were heard. A gash was seen on that person's body as blood was spilled. They then yelled, "I give up." Technically speaking, there was no giving up in the battle of the sleeping dragon. If Yusheng wished to continue, he would have been able to cut his opponent down easily. However, Yusheng shot his opponent a dull look before turning to the others. All of those sages at the pinnacle of their training from the significant cities felt a faint hint of fear, while Yusheng did little than shoot a look at them. Those pitch-black eyes of his were tremendously deep. It was as if they were able to see a devil like none other, looking down at everything in the world. They were all top-notch figures and were very confident with their own powers. They would not have participated in the battle of the sleeping dragon otherwise. However, for some reason, they seemed to have lost all of their confidence right there and then. It was as if there were indeed people that they would have stood no chance against right from the start. That person right before their eyes was one such being. Yusheng stepped out again, shaking their minds. "I give up. I yield." One fighter after another was seen leaving the battlefield. They gave up on their battles and retreated. None of them wanted to face that axe of his. While the battle of the sleeping dragon was perilous, to begin with, and the chance of losing one's life was very high, but no one truly wanted to die. They were all there to fight for an opportunity. However, right at that moment, it became clear that they stood no chance against that monster, and struggling would have been pointless. As for what they have promised the flaming prison city, none of that would have worth throwing their lives away for. Let Yen Tong fight this monster alone, they thought. The spectators within the castles were thoroughly shaken. One man with a two-sided axe was able to force that many top-notch figures just to give up and run? Are Yen Tong and Zhuo Su going to win this? Will one of them be able to rise from the platform? They wondered. There had always been people who went on to break expectations of others in the battle of the sleeping dragon. There had been a lot of precedences. It was yet another day for something like that to happen again, and it happened in such a frightening manner. Yen Tong was the only one left in that area of the battlefield. Yen Tong was the only one left in that area of the battlefield. Yen Tong's fiery god of war form stared at the devil battle form that was equally as huge. Yen Tong's form, which was basking in fiery light, seemed to be in stark contrast with the demonic colors of Yusheng's form. It was as if they were destined to become archenemies. Boundless lava fire coursed and coalesced around him, which later solidified. A huge fiery hammer of the fiery god of war gradually coalesced before Yen Tong. It was crimson all over and was a startlingly high temperature. He then swung his arm and stepped out, heading straight for Yusheng. Yusheng stepped and walked towards Yen Tong as well. Both men were cultivators wielding extremely overwhelming powers, and it seemed as if they planned to clash head-on. Boom, boom, boom. Both of them stepped onto the air continuously, causing their surroundings to shake. Yusheng moved according to the moves shown in the footwork of Xianyuan, incorporating suppressing will of the great path into his steps, bringing extremely high pressure to bear. Heat waves swept across the air and hit Yusheng's body. The fires of lava seemed to be out to burn the heavens away, but Yusheng, who was literally covered in fire, continued to press forward, breaking everything in his path. He swung the devilish axe down, and there seemed to be dark demonic glimmer appearing in their surroundings, containing unparalleled power. Yen Tong shouted and swung the fiery hammer in his hand out, clashing with the axe. The sense of power emanating from it caused all to keep their eyes fixed at the battlefield without blinking. Boom! Heaven-splitting clashes were heard, and everyone saw Yen Tong's body being brought down, dropping to the ground at high speeds. That devil-like body continued to head straight for the ground, and yet another strike from the axe was lashed out. It was as if it was to bring down the gods. Yen Tong's blood was boiling, and his arms shaking, yet he continued to swing his hammer with all his might, clashing against the axe coming down at him. With another intense rumble, the fiery hammer was surprisingly split open. The axe continued to come down. It landed onto the fiery god of war's body. Yen Tong's battle form crumbled with a loud boom, and his body accelerated as it dropped. He spat blood and crashed hard onto the ground below. Another rumble was heard. Yen Tong was unable to react in time before the heavenly godlike body of his opponent stepped onto him. He even closed his eyes when he saw the axe coming down, waiting in despair for the moment of death. However, he opened his eyes moments later and saw Yusheng shoot a cold glance at him. Yusheng then lifted the axe and charged elsewhere, not cutting him down. It was perhaps due to Yusheng not wanting to cause too much trouble on the battlefield. They were at Crimson Dragon Realm, after all. Yen Tong, who had been able to survive, did not feel fortunate. He was simply rendered dazed. He was confident that his powers were already at the top of his plane. His powers were strong, and he was halfway into the Saint Plane. Even attacks from his life spirit had been extremely overbearing. Yet on that day, he met someone else who was even more overpowering than he was, who went on to pummel him to the ground using the most direct and raging means. He had been well prepared for the battle of the sleeping dragon, yet he lost all the same. Furthermore, he knew how much his clan had done to foster him and how massive their bets were on him. There was no way he could have lost. Yet, at that moment, everything was over for him. It was not just him. All those who had bet on him turned pale at that moment. The three most highly anticipated figures consisted of over 90% of the bets placed. At that moment, however, there was only one of the three left on the Rising Dragon platform, Zhuosu. How long would he be able to last before Yusheng? Yusheng's extremely raging silhouette, like that of Devil, left a lasting impression on those who saw him. It was as if there was no way to take him down at all. Yusheng did not stop after taking down Yen Tong. He headed to another area of the battlefield right away. Yi Wuchen continued to fight Zhuosu. While he was by no means at an advantage, he was, nonetheless, able to hold his own. As such, Yusheng did not help him out. He headed somewhere else instead. Huang Jioge, Qin Zhuang, and Su Ke were at a disadvantage and stayed on the defensive, as they were being surrounded and attacked by several others. However, when Yusheng finally came, the hearts of those few sank and they looked glum. All of them saw what happened in the battle in the other corner. There was no way they would have been able to fight someone who had been able to overpower someone as mighty as Yen Tong. There had been another top-notch figure from the city who had been cleaved right away. Huge number of other fighters lost without even putting up a fight. "I yield," one of them said, and was getting ready to leave the battlefield. The others made their stance clear right away as well. Yusheng took a look at Qin Zhuang, Huang Jioge, and Su Quebec. His pitch-black eyes were icy. He switched the axe up, having the blunt side facing all of them before stepping out. Those who had yielded were frightened, wondering what was Yusheng up to. And they quickly found what he was up to. Sounds of bones cracking continued to be heard. Their internal organs seemed as if they had been ruptured, and all of them soon dropped to the ground, looking like having one foot in their coffins. Yusheng did not kill them, but their current state meant that it would have taken them months before they were able to get up again. "We're done for." Those who had bet on Zhuosu looked despaired, finding themselves completely done for. Almost everyone lost in that battle of the sleeping dragon. A dark horse emerged out of nowhere and stole everyone else's thunder. However, no one would have been insane enough to bet on someone who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. Situ Yen had placed her bets, but she hardly felt happy at all. She looked at Yusheng and then at Yi Futian. She then recalled what Yi Futian said to her before. He told her to bet everything she had on Yusheng, and she took him for a lunatic back then. But looking back, she wondered who had been the lunatic and who had been the idiot. While she had placed her bet and she won, she nonetheless felt that she had missed out on a once-in-a-lifetime chance. But then again, who dared to do that back then? Two others placed their bets on Yusheng, Shinjun, and Kong Xian. Shinjun seemed to have achieved his objective. Despite not having placed that huge of a bet, he earned considerably from it, which made it worthwhile for him to have laid such schemes in place. However, he was still concerned. Yusheng was too powerful. Furthermore, it was not just Yusheng. He felt something out of the ordinary with Yi Wuchen, and even Huang Jioge as well. Those people did not seem to be people studying under the same teacher. Kong Xian, on the other hand, had a very good idea of who they were. However, unlike Shinjun, she simply watched Yusheng fight. She came to realize that he was yet another person who would be able to threaten her. She lost to Yi Futian back in the Battle of Empty Realm, and she had always seen that defeat to be an insult. However, she never expected Yusheng to be just as formidable. He seemed to be invincible under Saint Plain. At that moment on the battlefield, Zhuosu gave up all of a sudden and took flight. There were only 6 people left standing on the battlefield. According to the rules, they were free to attempt to rise, so long as the Crimson Dragon above approved. However, Yusheng and the rest did not let him. They began making a move as soon as Zhuosu shot to the air, heading out and intercepting him above. Yusheng blocked his way and brought his axe down on Zhuosu. Yi Wuchen's sword arrived as well, penetrating through his body. Zhuosu was bloodstained and dropped to the ground. Seeing Zhuosu dropping to the ground severely injured and losing all capacity for combat, the last hope for many in the castles was snuffed out right there and then. It was a crushing defeat. Almost every single one of the native residents from all over Crimson Dragon Realm lost their bets, earning nothing. "We're rich," Yi Futian mumbled to himself. "Man, this feels good," he thought. It was said that participants were not allowed to continuously participate in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon, which he found to be a pity. he would have bankrupted the Crimson Dragon Emperor otherwise. He would have been willing to stay around and bet for a decade or so. What a shame. What a shame indeed. He came to wonder if the Crimson Dragon Emperor were able to read his thoughts. Would the Emperor clap him to death right there and then? Yu Sheng and the other four remained standing in the air above the rising dragon platform. They lifted their heads to look at the opening where the Crimson Dragon was seen circling above. Yu Sheng stepped out and the others followed, heading upwards. They were rising from the platform. The Crimson Dragon's colossal body circled the opening. It looked at Yu Sheng and Yi Wuchen with its huge head, saying, "You both shall pass." Other than Yu Sheng, Yi Wuchen had also performed admirably, for he had been able to fight Chua Su, qualifying him for the rise. While Huang Jioge, Su Ke, and Qin Zhuang showed decent performance, they were, nonetheless, lacking. "All 5 of us are together." Yu Sheng said, "Please make way, senior." "No." The Holy Dragon looked at them with its huge eyes and said coldly. Yu Sheng stared at the dragon, and demonic might was seen overflowing. He still held onto his devil ass. The air shook as Yu Sheng stepped out, heading straight for the huge Crimson Dragon, shocking the spectators. Yu Sheng then brought his axe down onto the Crimson Dragon. Everyone watched in shock. What the hell is happening here? Is that guy trying to cut Dragon Demon Saint open? They wondered incredulously. When everyone realized what was happening, those in the castles who did not place bets and were simply there to watch the battle cheered with booming voices. This is awesome, they thought. Yu Sheng is just a true devil. He is going to cut anyone down who stands in his way, and demon saints are no exception. Many had only realized that he still had the axe in his hand, and his devil battle form was never dispelled. Had he been getting ready for this? That asterisk shoal knew what was coming and headed straight for the demon saint. This is just ridiculous, they thought. Many even began to curse and jeer, not knowing what words could describe their current thoughts. "You're going too far," the Crimson Dragon berated him, and terrifying flames were seen circling its huge eyes. It lashed out with its claws right at Yu Sheng. Yi Wuchen and Qin Zhuang's swords headed for the dragon's eyes. The Crimson Dragon roared angrily, opening its mouth. It breathed holy fire capable of burning everything down. Its claws clashed with the axe. The dragon then pulled its claws back, and Yu Sheng was thrown behind as well. The dragon then whipped its tail at Yu Sheng. Yu Sheng's devil battle form was hit with a loud boom, but he stuck to the tail and grabbed it, latching on to the Crimson Dragon's tail with both hands. What happened at the very next moment shocked everyone. Yu Sheng looked at the sky above and roared, hoisting the dragon up with all his might with both arms, which were still grabbing the dragon's tail. He then flung the demon saint dragon away. "Go!" Yu Sheng said. Yi Wuchen and the others took the chance and charged for the opening, taking only a split second to emerge outside. The dragon roared in rage, turning its head around. It breathed flames capable of burning everything down at Yu Sheng. Yu Sheng let go of the dragon's body while he stepped outside, charging like a bolt of lightning while still burning with fires of the great path. The holy flames ended up only burning down his armor. All 5 of them emerged outside. Countless in the castles watched the scene unfold and were silent for a brief moment before cheers erupted all over the place. What happened right there and then was immensely shocking to all of them. The screen of light from the matrix crumbled when the rise was made. It was as if something was broken. Blinding light was then seen showering below. The screen of light from the matrix crumbled when the rise was made. It was as if something was broken. Blinding light was then seen showering below. Countless eyes in the castles were all focused at one single spot, the place where the 5 stood above the Crimson Dragon. Yu Sheng drew a great majority of the attention. All 5 of them rose from the Rising Dragon platform. The rules of the Rising Dragon platform at the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon said anyone capable of breaking out of the opening was considered to have succeeded. A sacred beast-level demon saint was guarding the place, and without its permission, none who were deemed qualified were allowed to make it through the opening. The Crimson Dragon deemed that the other 3 were inadequate, while only Yu Sheng and Yi Wuchen made the cut. However, Yu Sheng managed to fling a demon saint away using his overwhelming strength, barging outside with all of the other 4. No one dared to do something like that in the past. What Yu Xing did right there was challenging the rules, and yet, he was still playing by the rules. That crimson dragon glared at Yu Xing, having the great urge to chomp down on him and swallow him right there and then. It was an insult like none other. The dragon was actually flung away by a challenger of the battle of the sleeping dragon, whom it was tasked to guard against. The higher-ups were probably going to blame the dragon for slacking off. However, that man's strength was comparable to a saint's, as it would not have been able to fling something with its size away otherwise. Furthermore, his defense capacity was infinitely near that of a saint's as well. The flames of the great path were unable to burn him down after all. Yu Xing lowered his head and looked at the dragon. There was no fear to be found in those pitch-black eyes of his. The dragon refused to let them pass, so he resorted to doing it the hard way instead. "You really are something." A voice was heard from the crimson dragon before it headed below. The image on the ground lit up. It went into the matrix and disappeared. The saint who had been announcing the rules previously appeared once again in the air. He looked at all 5 of them and took out 5 tags, which he then handed to them. "Congratulations. These are the Rising Dragon tags. Hold on to them." Regardless of what methods they used to achieve the objective, they had played by the rules of the Crimson Dragon realm, and it was only the outcome that mattered. Yu Xing and the rest put their tags away, and many below St. Plain looked at them with envious eyes. With Rising Dragon tags in their hands, they were able to join the Crimson Dragon army anytime if they were willing. Everyone who made it through the battle of the Sleeping Dragon was awarded a Rising Dragon tag. That saint who gave them the tags did not explain what the tags were for. Anyone in Crimson Dragon realm would have known anyway. There was no need to elaborate. It was given that they were the ones participating in the battle of the Sleeping Dragon. The saint who handed them the Rising Dragon tag scanned the castles and left soon after. One silhouette after another was seen taking to the air from the platform, heading for the castles. They were all people who survived on the battlefield. As for those perished, people would go to pick up their bodies. The battle of the Sleeping Dragon had about a quarter of its participants die. The death count was very harrowing, and it served as a testament to the battle's brutality. Furthermore, those were all top-notch fighters, to begin with. However, there was always someone stronger. For instance, Yu Xing managed to overpower extremely formidable ones, like Yen Tong and Zhuosu. Yu Xing and the others headed to where the ones from Qianya City were. Futian and the others were able to sense many cold eyes clearly, and they did not seem friendly. In truth, Yu Xing had gone easy on everyone during the later stages of the battle of the Sleeping Dragon, instead of being as brutal as he could have been. Yen Tong and the others had been out to kill Yu Xing right from the start, yet Yu Xing pummeled them to the ground instead of killing them. Regardless, both Flaming Prison City and the Black Flame clan had invested a great deal in the battle of the Sleeping Dragon. The losses they suffered were harrowing. All of that happened because Yu Xing showed up. Other than that, the group of mighty ones from Tianjin City, who had been out to kill Su Ke earlier, including by Qian Luo of the City Lord's office, were all cut down by Yu Xing. All of that made for a score that remained to be settled. Rest assured, Brother Yi, the battle of the Sleeping Dragon has been held for many years, and all participants were participating out of their own will. They knew that there would be casualties and there were grudges. But then again, most forces were still able to tell that they were inferior, so even if there were grudges, since Yu Xing and the others were participating as representatives of Qianya City, those forces will not go wage wars between cities. Shen Jun spoke to Yi Futian with an amicable tone, appearing friendly. Yi Futian looked at him and was thinking that Shen Jun was a snake for having duped Yu Xing into participating in the battle of the Sleeping Dragon. If he were to lose, there was the risk of dying. If he were to win, he would have definitely offended someone. If they offended someone, they would need protection from Qianya City to ensure their safety, as the cities in Crimson Dragon City had come to some consensus a long time ago. The battle of the Sleeping Dragon had been held for too many years, after all. Unless there was a party proving capable of gobbling up other cities, wars would not happen. But then again, there was still another option, joining the Crimson Dragon army. "Thank you for your hospitality, young city lord," Yi Futian smiled and said. "That would be my duty as host." Yu Sheng and the others performed perfectly this time. Qianya City will be able to reap benefits for having you all participate in the battle of the sleeping dragon. I should be the one thanking you instead, Brother Yi. I shall throw a feast for all forces in Qianya City when I return and introduce you to them, welcoming you to the city once again, Shin Jun said with a smile. A peculiar look was seen deep in Yi Futian's eyes. Shin Jun seemed to have been a lot more polite. And he seemed to have been more sincere. He had previously duped them into participating in the event, and yet he made it clear that Qianya City had something to gain from it. If things had gone that far, Yi Futian was ready to keep playing along. I see that Yu Sheng, Huang Jioge, and the others are practicing different arts. It seems like my speculation before had proven erroneous. I take it that you all are not of the same force, Brother Yi? Shin Jun asked in a probing manner. Due to Yi Futian and Yaya being sword-wielders, and later seeing Yi Wuchen and Su Kei being swordsmen as well, Shin Jun thought all of those people came from some top-notch holy land of the sword in Emperor Xia's realm. Most of us are, and there are some who are friends coming on the same trip, Yi Futian smiled and said. Most of them came from the Holy Ji Palace. Huang Jioge emanated quite an extraordinary aura. I assume he is from some extraordinary clan then? Shin Jun took a look at Huang Jioge and continued to probe. Yi Futian smirked deep down. It seemed that Yu Sheng's frightening powers, as well as the abilities shown by Wuchen, Jioge, and the others, had made Shin Jun concerned. He then went about beating around the bush, trying to get to know who they really were. He had some mystical encounters. Yi Futian smiled and replied, not bothering to go into detail. Yi Futian just did not bother to deal with putting up an act that looked sincere. Yi Futian. A voice was heard at that moment. Yi Futian and the others turned around and saw a group of people at the castle across them, coming their way and then hovering before them. The group was none other than those from the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm. The one who took the lead was Kong Xian. Her alluring body looked flawless. Her perfect curves, long legs, intricate features sporting a feral grace, were astonishing to any graced by her beauty. Princess Kong Xian of the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm was someone of the same status as Xia Qingyuan in Emperor Xia's realm. What brings you here, Princess Kong Xian? Yi Futian called with a smile. Kong Xian seemed to have gotten a good grip on her emotions, refraining from fighting him right there and then. Back in Empty Realm all those years ago, Kong Xian was practically looking at him with eyes saying that she wanted to flay him alive. That went for the bird as well. They had been inciting Kong Xian one too many times after all. The eyes of the black-winged condor at the side sparkled. It missed the days back in the Empty Realm. It no longer dared to say anything it had said back then, for the power difference between them did not allow it to. Jialo Feng, who was at the side, had eyes filled with murderous intent, but it kept it in check nonetheless. It wanted nothing more than to tear Yi Futian and the animal apart. However, as it came to sense Yi Futian's aura up close, it found that he had indeed become a saint. If they were actually to fight, it would have probably lost. If Jialo Feng were to be the princess, it would have ordered them all to fight right there and then. Yi Futian, you all serve Emperor Xia's realm, and I wonder what the realm has given you? How about you come to the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm? What Emperor Xia's realm can give you, we at Demon Peacock Emperor's realm will be able to give you more. Furthermore, we shall do away with our past grudges, Kong Xian said, and Yi Futian felt somewhat surprised. He never expected the princess of Demon Peacock Emperor's realm to be there to recruit them instead. Kong Xian once lost to Yi Futian, and he had been able to steer the direction of the battle of the Empty Realm single-handedly. Now that he became a saint, there was little to say about his powers and talents. Yu Sheng had crushed everyone else single-handedly and overwhelmed many top-notch figures in the Crimson Dragon realm, going so far as to toss a dragon demon saint aside, just to make way for Yi Wuchen and the others. The unnaturally powerful fighting prowess displayed by the two of them alone made it worthwhile for her to try to take them to her side. Those two would have definitely become top-notch fighters spoken about in legends. Xia Qingyuan frowned and glared at Kong Xian with cold eyes. Are you here to recruit my people? She thought, bewildered. A cold aura was faintly sensed emanating from her. There was no way Yi Futian would have agreed to Kong Xian's proposal. There was no doubt about it. Speaking of Kong Xian's invitation, Emperor Li's realm had been very generous to Yi Futian as well. The imperial advisor of Dali had taken Yi Futian in as his student and taught him the deed of thorough comprehension. Emperor Li of the Dali dynasty had wanted to marry off his daughter to him to make him a son-in-law to the emperor. Conditions? Just what kind of conditions could Kong Xian offer? Is she going to offer herself to me? Yi Futian thought. If you're willing to become his servant girl, we might consider it, Xia Qingyuan replied coldly. Damn. The black-winged condor blinked as it looked at Xia Qingyuan. The bird was thinking that she was indeed quite the devil, stealing a line that it wanted to say but dared not to. Kong Xian's eyes were cold, and there seemed to be divine light shining in them. She locked gazes with Xia Qingyuan, and formless fighting intent seemed to have spread all over the place. Thank you for your invitation, Princess Kong Xian, but I'm doing rather fine in Emperor Xia's realm, Yi Futian smiled and replied. Kong Xian had only pulled her gaze back and looked at Yi Futian, saying, Fine then, we'll see about that. She then took her people and left soon after. Xia Qingyuan shot a cold look at Yi Futian after she left. Xin Jun's eyes shifted around those before him. He was relieved deep down. It seemed that Yi Futian did not lie to him. Yi Futian was indeed from Emperor Xia's realm, and he was not a member of royalty. He was instead a subordinate serving Emperor Xia. But then again, he would have probably among those close to the royal members, which explained why Kong Xian would want him to switch sides. As for Xia Qingyuan, there was no way she would have been Yi Futian's wife. However, there were secrets between the two of them, as she was very naturally hostile against that beautiful princess from the demon peacock emperor's realm. However, Xinjun did not go so far as to deduce Xia Qingyuan's status as a princess of Emperor Xia's realm. Yi Futian was the one who called the shots in the group, after all, which made him the leader. Even Xia Qingyuan was standing by his side while he was at the center. If Xia Qingyuan were the princess, this would have really been a mess. Yi Futian went to collect his winnings. Almost everyone who had bet lost. Yi Futian went to collect his winnings. Almost everyone who had bet lost. Yi Futian, Kong Xian, Xinjun, and Sidu Yen were the only ones who won. In the past battles of the Sleeping Dragon, there had been several very highly anticipated participants as well. While the battles might have had many variables, most of the time, one of the highly anticipated ones was capable of succeeding. What happened right there in that battle was comparatively rare. It was a total loss for the spectators. Yi Futian was wondering how much the Crimson Dragon Emperor had been able to earn in that one battle of the Sleeping Dragon. It was no wonder why the event was held once a month. If I were the one holding the event, I'd have made it once every 3 days instead, he thought. But then again, while the Crimson Dragon Emperor might not have cared about those training resources himself, the ones serving him would have consumed such resources in massive quantities. You want to return to Qinya City, brother Yi? Xinjun's attitude towards Yi Futian was a lot more polite. While he would not have thought Xia Qingyuan to be a princess, being someone who was valued by royal members of both Emperor Xia's realm and Demon Peacock Emperor's realm, there was no doubt about his extraordinary talents. Yu Sheng's performance had been startling as well. As such, Xinjun's attitude towards those people changed. He would have avoided offending those people as best as he could. Even if they might not have been people serving Emperor Xia directly, they might be very trusted subordinates nonetheless. Furthermore, if he were to be able to befriend those people, that connection might prove useful in the future. Sure. How about you, heroine from Situ clan? Yi Futian looked at Situ Yen and said. Situ Yen glared at him, wondering why he was speaking in such a frivolous manner despite being a saint. How about we all return together? I'm thinking of throwing a feast to welcome Brother Yi again. There will be a feast in several days at the City Lord's office. Please do show up, Xinjun smiled and said. Those from Qinya City all nodded. They needed to give that much face, at least. The group took flight and headed towards Qinya City. Yi Futian then headed to the border of the Situ clan and said to Situ Yen, I'll pay a visit to the Situ clan later. I'll check on little Ran along the way. Sure, Situ Yen nodded and said. It'd be a great honor to the Situ clan to have you with us, Brother Yi, an elder from the Situ clan said with a smile. Yu Sheng's performance at the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon notwithstanding, the fact that Yi Futian and his party had destroyed the Bliss Palace was impressive enough. Both the Situ clan and the Bliss Palace were both top-notch forces in Chenya City, and both were not all that different in terms of powers. You're too kind, senior. Yi Futian smiled and nodded. You're a man of passion, brother Yi. Shinjun, who was at the front, turned around, smiled, and quipped. He found it surprising that Yi Futian was still concerned about the little girl. While he found that action to be disagreeable, he admitted that Yi Futian had superior character compared to him. Surviving in a chaotic place like Crimson Dragon Realm meant that cultivators were mostly preoccupied with enhancing their powers, using all means to strengthen themselves to gain control of greater resources. There was no way weaklings would have been able to survive at the Crimson Dragon Realm. What are you going to do at the Situ clan? Xia Qingyuan asked Yi Futian telepathically. To pay a visit to the clan leader of the Situ clan, Yi Futian replied. Xia Qingyuan nodded and did not ask any further. We'd like you to visit the Mo clan as well if you have the time. An elder of the clan, Mo Chen, extended his invitation as well. The Mo clan was also a top-notch force in Chenya City. Sure, I'd pay a visit, Yi Futian smiled and replied. That settles it then. That mighty one did not expect Yi Futian to agree in such a forthright manner, which he found surprising. That settles it. Yi Futian flashed a beaming, warm smile, which made those around him feel comfortable. You should come by Chenya City often in the future, brother Yi. It'd do you a lot of good to visit the place more often. I'm prepared to introduce you to the forces throughout the city, by the way, Shinjun smiled and said. Thank you for your hospitality, Yi Futian replied. That's nothing. You're one of us from here on out. If you run into any trouble in Chenya City, you're welcome to look for me always, Shinjun answered in a very polite manner. Right, I do have a favor to ask from you, brother Shin. I'm afraid I have to bother you at the city lord's office at a later date. Yi Futian nodded and said seriously. No problem, Shinjun smiled and said. He was wondering if Yi Futian would have just let the grudge the newcomer had with him slide. It was apparent that Yi Futian resented him for one thing or another. It would have been nice if Yi Futian needed a favor, and he would have done all in his power to help. After returning to Chenya City from Crimson Dragon City, everyone returned to their home. Shinjun returned to the city lord's office while Yi Futian returned to the inn. The news with the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon spread all over the place and shocked many. No one would have expected the group that had destroyed the Bliss Palace would have had someone so terrifying among their sages, who practically mopped the floor with the top-notch figures who participated in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon that time. Yi Futian and Yu Sheng become two very, very renowned names in Chenya City. Yi Futian took several people to pay a visit to the Situ clan the next day. Many in the Situ clan came to receive him. Situ Yen appeared with little Ran as well. Uncle Yen, the little girl called obediently and smiled. Yi Futian hugged little Ran for a bit and then turned to the people of the Situ clan. Thank you for all you've done. We have an honored guest here, and the feast is ready. Please help yourself, Sir Yi, someone among them said. Yi Futian nodded and smiled. He walked to Situ Yan's side and said, I'd like to pay a visit to the leader of the Situ clan. Sure, I'll tell grandfather, Situ Yan nodded and said. Everyone took their seats at the feast at the Situ clan shortly after. A very old-looking elder stepped out, emanating an esteemed, imposing aura. Yi Futian rose and bowed. I'm Yi Futian, pleased to meet you, senior. Situ Zhong then nodded with a smile, saying, Your name has reached my ears in the clan, brother Yi. No need for formalities. Please take a seat. Thank you, senior. Yi Futian then said, Miss Situ here is valiant and forthcoming. Now that I meet her grandfather, I hardly find it surprising at all. You're too kind. Being able to destroy the Bliss Palace for just one little girl is one hell of a feat. We old folks are just older than you guys are. The place will belong to your generation sooner or later. Situ Zhong's voice was brimming and unbridled, making him sound like a grand bell and filled with spirit. It was done on a whim. Yi Futian then smiled and said, I just found what Bai Zhe did to be too disagreeable. Trampling on the lives of others without care is indeed despicable. But then again, that has always been the case with the world of cultivators. Even if you intend to change things, I wonder how many you could kill. Cultivators who have reached an age like Situ Zhong had long seen what the world was like. There were many types of cultivators in the world. Indeed. Yi Futian nodded. But since I happened to see something happening right in front of me, I just did what I could. It is for this matter that I come to visit you. How so? Situ Zhong looked at Yi Futian. The Crimson Dragon realm is strong, and people from all realms gather here, so there are many extraordinarily talented people around. They might lack opportunities. I'm thinking of setting up a place for cultivation here in Qianye City. What do you think, senior? Yi Futian said. Situ Zhong's expression was peculiar upon hearing what Yi Futian said. It was apparent that he was surprised. Cultivators came and went throughout the cities of the Crimson Dragon realm because so many from all realms gathered there. Even someone who held control over a city might have just left the place any time to train elsewhere. What Yi Futian put forth was hardly seen in Crimson Dragon realm. It was especially so with how things were in the cities of the Crimson Dragon realm, which were very unstable. There were few who would have bothered wasting resources to establish such places of training. Brother Yi, things at Crimson Dragon realm are complicated, and the people traveling between cities are in a very unstable state. It will take a very long time before results are seen. In Qianye City, by the way, those who stay here for long are only clans that have taken root here, Situ Zhong said. It is precisely for that reason that I come to you, senior. Propagating the path and cultivation would do immense good for the development of Qianye City. If a force like the Situ clan were willing to join, when Qianye City becomes strong, the Situ clan would prosper along with the city. What prompted you to go that far? Situ Zhong asked. None of that seemed to be doing much for Yi Futian himself. I'd like to see the powers of Qianye City consolidated, and to make Qianye City the topmost city in all of Crimson Dragon realm in the future. Yi Futian answered, but then again, I might not be the one doing all that. Those are my thoughts. This might require cooperation from the city lord. I'm afraid the Situ clan still falls short of pulling off something like that, Situ Zhong said. He was able to vaguely sense that Yi Futian might have wanted to do something else to get this off the ground. Furthermore, there was still a lack of a true reason from Yi Futian. Why would he want to consolidate powers and develop Qianye City? I'd like to introduce you to someone, senior. Yi Futian looked at Xia Qingyuan by his side and said, This is the princess of Emperor Xia's realm, Xia Qingyuan. Situ Zhong was dumbfounded and took a look at Xia Qingyuan. He was vaguely able to understand why Yi Futian wanted to do what he said he wanted to do. If that proved to be the case, then the reasons were indeed more than enough. There were many imperial realms from the Crimson Dragon region coming to set up shop and expand their forces at Crimson Dragon realm. For instance, the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm that Kong Xian belonged to reigned over Peacock City. If Emperor Xia's realm were to be a part of a city, it would have been a sufficient reason for developing the powers of a city. Situ Yen looked at Xia Qingyuan, feeling shocked. Many others from the clan shared the sentiment. Xia Qingyuan, the woman who had been following Yi Futian around, is a princess of Emperor Xia's realm? She thought. None of them saw that coming. They wondered what kind of status Yi Futian had back at Emperor Xia's realm. Even the princess is at his side, they thought. Situ Yen realized all of a sudden that if that had never occurred to her, then it would have never occurred to Shenjun as well. From the looks of things, the conversation between Yi Futian and Shenjun the day before had a lot going on between the lines. Is Emperor Xia's realm planning to expand in Qianye City? Situ Zhong looked at Xia Qingyuan and asked. I'd like your kind assistance, senior, Xia Qingyuan answered. Situ Zhong was silent for a bit. His position naturally compelled him to consider his clan's interests, to see if the proposal would have done the clan good or harm. Yi Futian's character suggested that he was a man of his word, that he was a comparatively upright man and would not scheme against them. If Emperor Xia's realm indeed intended to expand its influence in Qianye City, then it would be more influential and powerful than the current city lord's office. I'm glad to be of service, princess, Situ Zhong raised his cup and said. Thank you, senior. Xia Qingyuan and Yi Futian both raised their cups at the answer. The deal was considered sealed by then. They naturally needed support from top-notch forces in Qinya City if they wanted to set up shop there instead of just beating everyone down. Diplomacy served better at times. Yi Futian paid a visit to the Mo clan after he was done paying a visit to the Situ clan. Since it was the Mo clan that had extended the invitation, he did not see the need to hold back. Yi Futian paid a visit to the Mo clan after he was done paying a visit to the Situ clan. Since it was the Mo clan that had extended the invitation, he did not see the need to hold back. It did not matter what the Mo clan thought of the proposal. It would have been great if they were able to agree to it. Even if they were to not agree to the proposal, there was no way the Mo clan would have leaked the news anyway. Before the Bliss Palace was destroyed, the top-notch forces in Qinya City would have only dared to stay neutral. While it was said that the mighty dragon was no match for the native serpent, that still depended on the dragon. If the other imperial realms were to take a city by force, they could have done so quickly. However, some imperial realms were reluctant to do so, as not only was the trip difficult to make, but taking down a city meant that they would have had to leave a powerful force behind to manage the taken city. With conflict being a common sight in the Crimson Dragon realm, they might have run into all sorts of problems. As such, not all Renhuangs would have been willing to carve out a piece of the land for themselves in the Crimson Dragon realm. This time, however, they could have taken the opportunity to do so. The city lord's office organized a banquet several days later, inviting all major forces throughout the city to participate. It was said to be thrown to celebrate Yu Xing and the others, as well as to welcome Yi Futian and his party officially. Everyone in Qinya City, however, was able to tell that the young city lord wanted to get close to Yi Futian's party. But then again, their talents were so extraordinary that it was indeed worth the effort. Guests gathered at the city lord's office that day. Somewhat inferior forces showed up early and waited at the place where the banquet was held. A group of people was received into the city lord's office, and many went up to cup their hands in greeting. "Greetings, Senior Situ. You're all being too kind." Situ Zhong cupped his hands and returned the gesture. Many were surprised that even the clan leader of the Situ clan, Situ Zhong, showed up personally. It seemed that he held the banquet in very high regard. However, one who was able to destroy the Bliss Palace was indeed worth being taken seriously by the top-notch forces in Qinya City. If Yi Futian and his people were to stay in Qinya City for prolonged periods, they would have become legends in the city. "Senior Situ." Xin Jun brought his people and walked up to him, bowing politely to him. He said, "I did not expect that you would show, Senior. I would have greeted you outside if I knew you were coming." "No need for formalities, young city lord. It's quite an event in Qinya City, and so I just thought to come and sit around for a bit," Situ Zhong smiled and replied. The people in the Situ clan all smiled, and there was nothing out of place with them. "Situ Yen, why didn't you notify me that the elder was coming?" Xin Jun smiled and asked Situ Yen. Situ Yen smiled and said nothing. Xin Jun then said, "Please, Senior. Have a seat." "Great." Situ Zhong nodded and took a seat at one of the privileged seats. Many who showed up and greeted everyone, making the scene very lively. The mighty ones from the Mo clan showed up shortly after. What was even more surprising was that the clan leader of the Mo clan was there as well. Many noted that all the big shots in Qinya City seemed to have all made it to the banquet. "Sir Yi is here." A voice was heard at that moment, and many turned to look in that direction. It was none other than Yi Futian and his group. They all walked forward, and people from many forces in Qinya City rose. Some smiled and said, "Your name has been all over the place, Sir Yi, and you look more extraordinary than you're said to be." Yi Futian nodded faintly with a plain expression. Many forces had brought their women with them to the banquet, and they were all very beautiful, exceptional members of the younger generations. Their eyes sparkled when they saw Yi Futian, thinking how handsome that legend known all over the city was. That full head of silver hair of his looked very charismatic, and they all thought he must have had quite a colorful past. However, Yi Futian walked straight ahead without taking one look at them. After seeing what Xia Qingyuan and the Glass Saint looked like, all of them thought that they were ridiculous for having thought anything in the first place. Yi Futian naturally did not know what was going on in their heads. He walked forward, and Shinjun rose as well. He said with a smile, "You're all that is left now. Please take a seat, brother Yi." However, Shinjun did not see any smile on Yi Futian's face. Instead, he looked different from before. His silver hair billowed and his white robe looked flawless. His chiseled face looked cold, and those deep eyes of his seemed to be able to see through people. Shinjun, Yi Futian went up and halted his steps. The others stood behind him, and they all looked solemn. The atmosphere changed within an instant. The smiles on the faces of everyone present rescinded. It was apparent that they all sensed something different was going on. Yi Futian called Shinjun by his name. Furthermore, his eyes were aloof and cold, seeming condescending even. At that moment, Yi Futian emanated the might of a saint and looked somewhat supreme. Sidu Yan's eyes sparkled. Yi Futian's bearing seemed to have changed within that instant. He appeared utterly different. "What is the meaning of this, brother Yi?" Shinjun had noticed Yi Futian's changes as well. He seemed to sense a looming danger ahead. He came to hold Yi Futian in high regard at the moment. He had been treating him with respect in hopes of reconciling the conflict between him and Yi Futian. While both parties had been amicable and did not turn on each other, he knew what he did to Yi Futian before, and Yi Futian harbored resentment over it. As such, he did his best to reconcile and mend the relations between the two of them. He no longer had any thoughts of using him. However, it seemed to be too late. He had invited various forces in Qinya City and thrown a banquet to welcome Yi Futian, but Yi Futian did not seem to be of an attitude befitting that of a guest. He felt that Yi Futian was there to interrogate him instead. "We knew each other somewhere out there, and you invited us to Qinya City. You then set up a meeting between Bai Zhe and us, then followed up with testing Yu Sheng and the others, baiting us into participating in the battle of the Sleeping Dragon. If Yu Sheng was of inferior powers, he might have ended up killed by Yen Tong and the others. Was that what you meant by the battle being harmless?" Yi Futian looked at Shinjun and said. Shinjun frowned after hearing that Yi Futian questioned him in front of everyone. Yi Futian was indeed there to hold him responsible. Participation in the battle of the Sleeping Dragon was entirely voluntary. "I don't remember forcing any of you to participate." Shinjun then said coldly, "I have gone all the way to welcome you, brother Yi. So what do you mean by this? If we lost in the battle of the Sleeping Dragon, it would have been our people who would have died. If we won, you'd be the one to get awarded, no?" Yi Futian asked, "Since when have we become your subordinates, Shinjun? How about we let the past be the past, brother Yi? We'll drink and let it all slide. You're free to name whatever compensation you want. If you'd like the rewards from the battle of the Sleeping Dragon, you're free to have them. We'll end things at that, how about it?" Shinjun said with a glum face, apparently trying to make compromises. The lord of a city was lower than that of a Renhuang force, meaning that he was at a disadvantage. However, he did not know how much power Yi Futian was capable of mobilizing. "I want Qinya City. Are you going to give the city to me?" Yi Futian asked. Shinjun's expression turned completely cold. He glared at Yi Futian and said, "Don't go too far, brother Yi. You might be highly valued by the Renhuang of Emperor Xia's realm, but this is still the Crimson Dragon realm." Both men glared at each other for a while. A stifling atmosphere washed all over the place in an instant before the banquet had even started. Two saintly auras clashed, and all who were present at the banquet shuddered. Some knew what was going on, and those who did not know dared not get in the middle haphazardly. The situation was tense enough for people to know it was to better wait and see, instead of doing anything immediately. Yi Futian took one step out, and it was all that was needed to bring a stormy aura of the saints sweeping all over the place. A formless gale swept the entire banquet. Shenjun's expression was gloomy and dark, finding it baffling that Yi Futian dared to make a move against him in the city lord's office. What is his backing for doing all this? He thought. There were few others behind Shinjun who stepped forward, with one of them emanating a very powerful aura. Yaya stepped from behind Yi Futian as well. A formless gust of sword aura washed all over the space. The cups in the banquet shattered within an instant. The tables and chairs were then destroyed bit by bit. Mighty ones from all forces unleashed powerful saintly might for protection. They all retreated. That terrifying storm swept all over the place, and every miscellaneous item crumbled instantly. Powerful auras burst within the city lord's office and swept all over the place. They looked up at the sky and felt many powerful auras descending from above all of a sudden. They all flashed, intending to leave the banquet. The figures that appeared high in the air descended, sealing the place, and landed on the buildings at the city lord's office. All of them were surprisingly saints. Shenjun's expression turned especially gloomy. Yi Futian had brought people of Emperor Xia's realm here? The figures that appeared turned their eyes and looked at the place where the banquet was held. They all bowed in the direction where Xia Qingyan was and said, "Greetings, Princess." "Princess?" The eyes of many froze, and Shenjun felt a shudder running all over him. His face seemed rather ashen. How could this possibly be? He thought. There is a princess from Emperor Xia's realm in Yi Futian's group? He turned around and saw the figures behind Yi Futian. He eventually turned to Xia Qingyuan. He recalled the conversation between Xia Qingyuan and Kong Xian at that very instant. There was only one line to be had, and he did not think too much about it as a result. Xia Qingyuan had just tagged along with Yi Futian, after all. He had only discovered that he made a grave mistake at that moment. Women who were in love would not have cared about their status. They would have been willing to stand by the sides of their beloved as secondary characters, even if the woman in question was a high and mighty daughter of a Renhuang. If he were to know that the princess of Emperor Xia's realm was in their midst, he might have apologized right away instead of trying to mend their relations through drinking at a banquet. It was apparent that Yi Futian never intended to give him any chance. He made a move right after showing up. Xia Qingyuan turned her eyes to the air and nodded lightly, which seemed to have confirmed the speculations of Shenjun and the others. She is indeed a princess of Emperor Xia's realm, they thought. What does it mean for a daughter of Renhuang willingly standing behind a young cultivator in Emperor Xia's realm anyway? If they were to be told that Xia Qingyuan had no thoughts about Yi Futian, none of them would have believed that. Shenjun is done for this time. A thought crossed in the minds of many present. It was no surprise why that group of people was so extraordinary and dared to wipe out the palace lord of the Bliss Palace without considering the consequences. They had backing from someone even more powerful. Yi Futian dared to attack Bliss Palace not only because of Yaya. Yi Futian dared to attack Bliss Palace not only because of Yaya. After all, for him to destroy the Bliss Palace, other things needed to be considered. It seemed the City Lord office requested an explanation. Xia Qingyuan came to the Crimson Dragon realm from Emperor Xia's realm to conduct trials. It was impossible that she would not have strong cultivators accompany her. What was more, this time, the request from Yi Futian for Xia Qingyuan's help had a purpose in itself. "Everyone, help me take them down." The expression on Shenjun's face changed again and again. His eyes turned to the cultivators at the banquet. Many cultivators had descended upon the city lord's office, and Yi Futian was going to make a move against their city lord's office at Qianye City. As Yi Futian said before, what if I wanted to take Qianye City? Well, this matter could not have a satisfying ending, but if Yi Futian and Xia Qingyuan were both taken, then there was still a chance to turn the tides. No one paid any attention to Shenjun. Several top principalities had already been talked to by Yi Futian, so they were all aware and remained calm and collected because they had previously anticipated the situation at the moment. In the cities of Crimson Dragon Realm, changeovers of ownership were commonplace. Plundering and infightings with one another continuously, and eruptions of occasional battles of various sizes were not unheard of. Under such circumstances, for the forces in the city to be loyal to the city lord's office was, obviously, an impossibility. Right now, the opponent of the city lord's office of Qianye City was the people from Renhuang's realm. In the Crimson Dragon realm, many from the Renhuang realm came here to expand their power, and those were relatively strong individuals. Even on other matters, where Renhuang was not allowed to interfere with the goings-on in the Crimson Dragon realm, the underlings of Renhuang were more than capable of taking over a city. Under this circumstance, the most they could do was to remain neutral, so how could they help the city lord's office? With the destruction of Bliss Palace fresh in their memory, who would want a repeat of it? Young City Lord, today's matter was caused by many injustices, Situ Zhong said with a clear voice. The people of Situ clan stood up and suddenly seemed to surround Shinjun and others with a blooming pressure. The people of Chinya City looked at him. This old guy had picked a side. Shinjun looked pale. In this space, his people now were at an absolute disadvantage. The Situ clan had committed treason by supporting Yi Futian. Yi Futian walked toward Shinjun, and he said in a cold voice, "Shinjun, since you invited me to Chinya City, I won't hold back." But Shinjun stepped out. His body soared into the sky, and the might of the Saint Plane was fully released. In an instant, flames filled the sky and shrouded the firmament. Yi Futian looked up slightly. He took a similar step, turning into lightning that shuttled through the void, and headed straight to Shinjun. Shinjun stood above the void. His hands were forming a seal as he bathed in a dazzling luster of flame. Many immense flaming dragons roared angrily and rushed out with incredible speed toward Yi Futian. With the divine brilliance upon his body, Yi Futian seemed to be covered with a layer of sacred starry armor, and the flames swallowed him up but did not burn him. The immense body of the fire dragon impacted him, and a powerful roaring sound came out. That brilliant golden body penetrated that of the dragon, like a golden streamer, sacred but bright, aiming directly toward Shinjun roar. Another angry roar trembled between heaven and the earth, and an extremely fierce nine-headed crimson flame dragon appeared behind Shinjun. The sacred light of fire surrounded it. The nine-headed dragon moved at the same time, wanting to swallow Yi Futian in one gulp. Yi Futian did not stop at all. His spinning body turned into real lightning, and the golden lightning sliced through the void and rushed into the mouth of the dragon. Suddenly, a dazzling radiance erupted above the dragon's body, and the shrill sound of gurgling was heard. The immense body of the dragon exploded and shattered, and a figure emerged from the endless sword might. Its body shot straight toward Shinjun. Shinjun's face was pale. He had been extremely confident in his offense, but it was directly crushed and broken. The magnificent streamer magnified in the pupil. He saw Yi Futian raise his arms. Huang Ting fist will burst forth, breaking through the void. It penetrated Shinjun's last defense until it blasted upon his chest. Click. The sound of the bones exploding was so clear that everyone below could hear it, and the people from the city lord's office wanted to come to his aid. However, Yaya, Situ Zhong, and the others were standing there, so who could intervene? Shinjun spat out a mouthful of bright red blood, and his body flew backward. Yi Futian took a step forward, and his arm, flowing with pure brilliance, struck out again. For a moment, the aurora of the fists pierced through the void and kept blasting on Shinjun's body. It was like rays of golden light pierced through his chest to his back. Shinjun's body, like rootless duckweed, was blasted weakly, flying mindlessly in the air. Yi Futian slapped a large palm print down until he was blasted on a building. The building collapsed and shattered, and Shinjun's body fell right into the ruins. There was no strength, and his hands lay weakly there. Yi Futian's figure drifted down to the ground. He stood in front of Shinjun and looked down at the figure that lay on the ground. Shinjun coughed up blood, but even the coughs sounded weak, and his eyes were still open, watching the figure that was standing in front of him and looking down at him. Those eyes, at that moment, were so proud yet scornful of his existence. Shinjun realized that he had been using Yi Futian and treated him like a clown. But in fact, he was the clown in the eyes of the others. From the start, Yi Futian had never really cared about his existence. Everything that he had done was more like a joke. His long silver hair blowing in the wind, and Yi Futian didn't say a word to him but looked straight ahead. An extremely forceful breath was blooming. At the moment when the breath was released, the entire city lord's office became extremely oppressed. It was unclear when Yaya had come in front of Yi Futian. It seemed the pressure of the might was giving her considerable tension, and her pair of sharp eyes stared steadily ahead. There was a sensation of extreme heat. A middle-aged man clad in a robe decorated with flames stood there quietly. His pupils seemed to be burning with fire. When he looked up into the void, the vast sky suddenly turned fiery red, and the sky was burning. Within the circumference of several hundred miles from the city lord's office, everyone felt hot and uncomfortable. When they looked up at the sky that was burning red, they were all shocked. What was happening at the city lord's office? This seemed to be the breath of the city lord. However, the city lord of Chinya City was said to be cultivating alone. The affairs of Chinya City were left to the young city lord, and he had not been seen for a long time. And today seemed to be the day that the young city lord hosted a dinner banquet in honor of Yi Futian. But for some reason, it seemed like a terrifying battle had blown up. Crimson Dragon City, the main city of Crimson Dragon Realm, was under the direct command of the Crimson Dragon Emperor. The surrounding cities were filled with top personalities who not only had to compete with top cultivators from other major interfaces, but sometimes, their opponents were from all walks of life directly under the command of the emperors of other realms. Under such circumstances, the people in charge of the main cities around Crimson Dragon City today were truly from the existence of Top Saint Plain. They were either born of the cultivators of the Crimson Dragon Realm or originated from travelers from all parts of the Crimson Dragon Realm, who eventually settled here or in other principalities of emperors. The city lords of every city in this central area belonged to Nirvana Plain. If these lords were placed within each Renwang's realm of the Crimson Dragon Realm, they were all giants who, alone, could deter a major force. Anyone who was not the best of the best had already been eliminated in the fiercely competitive environment of Crimson Dragon Realm and had no qualification to control a city at all. Shen Tianzhan, city lord of Chinya City, likewise, was also such a fearsome presence. He immersed himself in cultivation and possessed tremendous strength. If he intervened, it must have been that he had encountered a powerful opponent. It was highly likely that someone would come to seize the city. At this moment in the city lord's office, Shen Tianzhan looked up at the sky. He stood there casually, like a god, with his body as the center, and a burst of hot glow erupted. However, as strong as Shen Tianzhan was, his look toward the sky seemed extremely grave. He said, "If my son offended anyone, I am responsible for the lack of discipline, and I apologize on his behalf." In the distance, Yi Futian's body floated in the air, looking at that proud figure. The existence of Nirvana Plain was astounding. He looked up into the void and saw a figure drift down from above. The man was dressed in a white cloak. He appeared very mysterious. He held a scepter in his hand, and his aura wasn't too great. But by merely standing there, he seemed to pose a great threat to the city lord of Chinya City. The figure in white in the void looked at Xia Qingyuan and Yi Futian. He asked, "Princess, what shall we do?" Xia Qingyuan came to Yi Futian's side in a flash. She whispered, "You decide." Yi Futian looked at the front. He knew who came this time. In the land of 9 states, the first person in the legendary saint ranking list, the Great Shaman. In his hand was the number 1 divine implement, Scepter of Control. Many years ago, the Great Shaman followed Emperor Xia in cultivation and remained at the side of Emperor Xia. He became Emperor Xia's confidant. This trip, he was tasked to guard the safety of Xia Qingyuan. The strength of the Great Shaman was unquestionable. The land of 9 states had finally produced a figure of great acclaim. Yi Futian looked to Shen Tianzhan and said, "Shen Jun invited us to Chinya City and used us without regard for our lives. That being the case, now Chinya City is changing hands. If you want to leave, we will not detain you, but Shen Jun stays. If you stay, you can help us manage Chinya City. In the future, when the time is right, we will grant you another city in return." Either choice, no matter which, Shen Jun would not be released. Otherwise, the departure of Chinya City Lord, Shen Tianzhan, would be a hidden concern. Shen Tianzhan looked toward Yi Futian, and his eyes seemed to be burning with terrible flames. At first glance, Yi Futian felt his eyes tingle. It was as if the sensation of flames had rushed directly into his pupils. But in the next moment, Shen Tianzhan looked away and turned his attention to the Great Shaman once more, saying, "Shen Tianzhan of Chinya City, please enlighten me." The Great Shaman bowed his head. His eyes landed on Shen Tianzhan, and he introduced himself, the Great Shaman of Emperor Xia's realm. The Great Shaman bowed his head. his eyes landed on Shintianzhan, and he introduced himself, the great shaman of Emperor Xia's realm. At the moment when the voices of the two men faded, a fiery hot sensation shrouded the infinite space, and both the sky and the earth turned red. Futian lowered his head and glanced down. The earth seemed to be roasting, and there was a vague and surreal feel to it. Just how strong was the saint of Nirvana plane? Perhaps a single thought was enough to destroy a city. Flames were ignited in the sky and the earth, and all the cultivators released their power to shield their bodies against that invisible force. Shen Tianzhan's body was bathed in a radiant sacred fire. In an instant, his body skyrocketed. Above the sky, an immense and boundless flaming dragon opened its enormous mouth. It emerged from the burning red sky and moved toward the great shaman. Countless people on the ground looked up at the sky, their hearts trembling violently. They felt tiny in front of the dragon. It was as if a breath from the dragon could burn them to nothing. The great shaman stood there quietly, and his body did not sway. Above his cloaked body, countless bright, golden lights lit up, like countless golden threads, moving toward his body at high speed. In an instant, those endless golden threads, like a divine net of space, winding upwards, covered the sky and the sun, winding on the body of the dragon. The sacred flaming dragon continued to dive down, but the divine net of space expanded, and the golden threads entangled it within. Great shaman raised the scepter, and the endless lines of space cut through the void and the dragon's body, cutting it into countless pieces. For a moment, the immense sacred dragon turned into endless fire and rained down. The ground exploded and shattered madly, and infinite flames shot from above the sky, condensing together, and fierce roaring sounds were heard. Shen Tianzhan stood proudly above the sky. Both of his hands were forming a seal, and many flaming gods of war that stood a few thousand meters tall appeared in the sky, surrounding the great shaman. The palms of Shen Tianzhan, with the formed seal, blasted out. Suddenly, all the flaming gods of war accompanied his movement and blasted shocking flaming palm prints, covering the sky and destroying the void. The great shaman stood in the center of these flaming gods of war, appearing extremely insignificant, like a gnat. At this moment, above the great shaman, a more brilliant light bloomed forth. A golden lotus appeared under his feet, and the lotus petals released an endless glow. The golden lotus rotated and expanded continuously. The lotus petals opened and closed, and instantly wrapped his body in it, turning it into a lotus light screen, shrouded him within. Bang bang bang. The godlike flaming palm prints blasted attacks, and the lotus petals sunk inward as if to melt in destruction. But the glow was shining, and the giant golden lotus continued rotating. The petals perished and were reborn with even more brilliant light. They bloomed toward heaven and the earth. Giant lotus appeared one after another, continually expanding, and an unparalleled golden glow was emitted at the same time. The space was drowning in dazzling light, and the bodies of the flame gods of war were penetrated, torn, and shattered. The void in which the great shaman was located had been completely transformed into a world of fire, and those flames seemed to be slightly surreal, burning up the sky. Countless people on the ground looked up at the sky. If they had stood there, they would probably be turned into nothingness. The sun's rays sprinkled down and reflected on that flame space as if interspersed with each other. The sun's rays also turned into part of fire, so that the way merged with the heaven, and the fire of the great path now one with the sun. The world of flames suddenly erupted, and the space in which the great shaman was started burning. It turned into a true solar furnace, smelting all existence. However, the great shaman still stood there, wearing a cape, and his eyes were as calm as they were before. He raised his foot and walked forward calmly. Every step was taken very slowly but extremely steadily. Lotus petals surrounded him. Each petal opened and closed to give rise to other lotus flowers. These lotus flowers were much like in a space of their own. In the moments of opening and closing, it had devoured the fire of the great path. The great shaman walked toward Shintianzhan, step by step. He looked up slightly and his eyes were extremely demonic. It was as if they could captivate and capture those who looked into them. Shen Tianzhan looked at those eyes and frowned. A horrific spiritual power invaded him, and instantly, a space divine matrix seemed to have appeared in his mind. Behind the great shaman, a radiant matrix appeared, and radiant brilliance bloomed upon the matrix with countless golden threads penetrating the void, covering Shen Tianzhan's body. Shen Tianzhan retreated, but the golden threads increased, and the matrix elevated toward the sky. Above the firmament, it turned into a matrix of space that sheltered the sky. With the endless space radiance now falling downward, Shen Tianzhan had nowhere to go, as the world was blocked. The crowd below looked up at the sky in horror. At the level of nirvana, it all depended on whose attack was the stronger, and Shen Tianzhan did not have the strength to destroy the great shaman. At this moment, could Shen Tianzhan bear the counterattack of the great shaman? The great shaman's body floated in the air, rising higher and higher until he was integrated into the divine matrix that was above the sky. He raised the scepter and looked down at Shen Tianzhan, saying, "This is the art of judgment. Do you still want to continue the fight?" Shen Tianzhan looked up at the great shaman. His body still emitted the majesty of might, but he knew in his heart that he had already lost the battle, and he was not sure that he could bear the attack of the great shaman. For a moment, the fire of the sky dissipated, and the sensation of extreme heat disappeared immediately. The heated sky and earth restored as they were before. Seeing this scene, the great shaman lowered his hand and retracted the scepter. The divine light of space also disappeared, and his eyes were no longer terrible. The crowd below exhaled a sigh of relief. The battle that just occurred was like a dream. Qianya City Lord Shen Tianzhan was defeated, everyone said secretly in their hearts. Qianya City would be officially changing hands. This great shaman should be the top figure in Emperor Xia's realm. The top existence cultivated by the emperors was indeed awesome. Among the many cities in Crimson Dragon Realm, only a few city lords who were at the peak of their power could fight such figures. There were several peak existence cultivators in the Crimson Dragon Realm. Even though they claimed to be standing on the top of Nirvana Plane, there were rumors that some Nirvana saints had offended Renhuang, which accounted for their flight to the Crimson Dragon Realm to become the master of a city. Other Renhuang of the realm could come to the Crimson Dragon Realm, but they could not wreak havoc on its territory. Of course, the dispatch of the saints was not something the Crimson Dragon Emperor cared much about. Shen Tianzhan descended and landed on the ruins of the city lord's office in front of Yi Futian. He glanced down at Shen Jun, who was gravely injured, and saw despair in his eyes. His father, who was also defeated, was implicated because of him, and now the entire city lord's office was lost. All this was because he had wanted to use Yi Futian and his people. Now, it was not so easy to send away the deity that he had invited in. Yi Futian wanted Qianya City. Shen Tianzhan picked up Shen Jun's body. Yi Futian stood aside and did not stop him. The great shaman drifted down and descended next to Xia Qingyuan. They just wanted Qianya City and were not worried that Shen Tianzhan would go to the extreme. There was no need for it when he had already cultivated to this level. Turning around, Shen Tianzhan stopped and said, "I will stay." Then he took Shen Jun going deeper into the city lord's office, which, by now, was half in ruins. "Great shaman, take over the city lord's office," Xia Qingyuan said to him, and the great shaman nodded. The next step would be to firmly control the city lord's office. Since Shen Tianzhan chose to stay, he did not need to help, but he must not be given a chance to add to the chaos. "Who will be the city lord?" Xia Qingyuan said, looking at Yi Futian. "Naturally you, a princess." Yi Futian looked at Xia Qingyuan. "I'm not interested," Xia Qingyuan said lightly. "You'll take over." Yi Futian looked at Xia Qingyuan but saw that her eyes were focused far away. No one knew what she was thinking. "Princess, in the future, Qianya City could be the foundation of Xia Emperor Xia's realm in Crimson Dragon Realm. I am not suited for this duty," Yi Futian said. "Aren't you always complaining that you have no place in Emperor Xia's realm? Now, you will be named as the city lord of Qianya City. I will ask my father the emperor to make it official, and father will not object," said Xia Qingyuan, looking at Yi Futian. Previously, Yi Futian was just a bodyguard for the princess. Yi Futian was speechless. Since when did he complain? Women did not make any sense. But it was much better sounding than being the bodyguard of the princess. Boss, this she-devil must have been traumatized by Kong Xian. The voice of Black Wind Condor resounded in Yi Futian's mind. Not long ago, Kong Xian came to poach him. However, this clown had learned his lesson and dared not say it out loud, but only said it secretly to Yi Futian. Want to get beat up again? Yi Futian smiled at the little condor and immediately he behaved. Very well, I will take over temporarily, but if I leave I will give up the position, Yi Futian said, but Xia Qingyuan ignored him. Next was to straighten out Qinya City. What happened at Qinya City soon came to pass, and all the cities knew that Yusheng came from Emperor Xia's realm, and now, Emperor Xia's realm had also seized a city in Crimson Dragon Realm. However, although it was known at this time, it had not caused much disturbance. After all, these kinds of occurrences happened often in the Crimson Dragon Realm, and the top figures had seen it all. At this time, inside a city in Crimson Dragon Realm, there was a group of people in a palace. One of them was well known to Yi Futian, the crown prince of Dali dynasty, Li Yao. After hearing the news brought to him by the messenger in front of him, Li Yao flashed a coldness in his eyes. Was it the great shaman of Emperor Xia's realm, who personally accompanied to guard? Now, they had even taken a city in Crimson Dragon Realm. His Royal Highness, the strength of this great shaman is unfathomable. He has been following Emperor Xia all these years and is definitely one of the peaks power of Emperor Xia's realm, said a nobleman clad in a golden python robe behind him. Li Yao nodded, and a cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It seems that there will be a need for our Imperial Advisor of Dali. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.